False rideshare and gig food delivery accounts are a big business. While there's no single person or group that dominates it, it can be said that there is a network of individuals and groups that comprise it. And those that are involved in this form of unsavory activity earn thousands of dollars each week. While it's easy to blame immigrants because they are often those who are part of this unsavory network and are responsible in part for creating many of these false accounts for people who are looking for opportunities to earn money. Blame should also be placed on these gig apps. They are profiting off of undocumented workers. Now, this is not the first time that something like this is being said. This is not some new, stark, brand new revelation that I'm sharing. In fact, it has been mentioned or chatted about years ago, as early as 2018, about these gig apps using undocumented workers or allowing undocumented workers onto the apps. There was an article in 2023 in the New York Post in which a Uber Eats driver uh, talks on the record about his observation of undocumented workers. And then this year in 2024, New York, a Newsweek article quoted U.S. politicians um, speaking rather negatively about the pervasiveness of undocumented workers on these apps. Now, the source of this segment of the Gig Geezer is actually one slither of insight of a much broader issue. And this source comes from a Wired online article that features a Brazilian national, Miss Priscilla Barbosa, who arrived in the United States in April 2018 with, according to the article, $117. Now, her arrival in the United States was brought about by her reacquainting herself with someone whom she had met years prior. And she was to meet up with that individual at JFK Airport, but that person was a no show. Hence, she was left with fending for herself, starting out with $117. So she's a rather resourceful person as it's described in the article. And what she did was search her Facebook groups in which she was aware of some Brazilians who were in Massachusetts, and she made her way to Massachusetts. She found work. She found a place to stay. She eventually financed a vehicle. She worked in a pizzeria, but then she was let go because of a seasonal slowdown during summer. So now she's looking for another way of earning money in the United States because she likes being in the United States and she likes the idea of making it here. So a posting by she notices a posting by one of the administrators. He boasts of how he earns $250 a day doing Uber rideshare. What caught her attention was the rhetoric about how you can be your own boss, set your own hours, and earn money while just driving for Uber. Now, that sounds like some stuff that caught my attention. Maybe not about being your own boss, but it was about earning money. In fact, at that time, it was telling people that you could earn 25 to $30 an hour doing rideshare, and also you have the flexibility of working whenever you want, however you want, and how long you want. So that intrigued her very much. And so the question was, how would she be onboarded onto the app? Now she's in the United States on a tourist visa, which lasts only 6 months. She does not have a U.S. driver's license, but she has a Brazilian driver's license. She does not have a vehicle. Well, she has a vehicle. She is able to get insurance because insurance companies allow for you to apply for insurance with within a with a with an international driver's license. So the main thing is just being onboarded. Well, the answer to that is her renting an account that was created by a Brazilian immigrant himself. The source of the account information comes from him paying a US citizen to rent her information so that he can rent out that account. Now, according to the article, Priscilla, Priscilla Barbosa said upon being onboarded, she earned over $2,000 her first week doing rideshare. So we're going to presume that she was earning at least 1,500 a week and maybe topping out at over 2,000, which was a possible number back in 2018. In part because drivers received a much larger share of the rider's fare. Back in 2018, I was my fare my back in 2018, I was under the 75% cut. There were those who were onboarded 2014, 2015, at least in here in South Carolina, they were under the 80% number. Of course, those numbers decreased with each succeeding year. And as we know, at least in 2024, rideshare drivers are receiving, in some cases, less than 50% of the rider's fare. Now, that said, Priscilla Barbosa was now making money and was able to take care of certain things um, that she had aspired to take care of upon arriving in the United States. But she was also met with a bit of adversity in that Uber deactivated her. As it turned out, she approached the same person who provided her initial account, and she was onboarded again. But the person who provided her with that second account also intimated to her that what he was doing was paying someone to use their information, enabling him to rent that account to her. Now, while in this second iteration of driving, she happens to um, she happens to find a rider's ID in her vehicle. She says in the article that she took a picture of the front and back, a screenshot of the front and back of that ID, and she got in contact with the writer. She was hoping, she had hoped for a pleasant exchange with that writer, but it was far from what she had hoped for. So she makes note of that encounter, and as it turns out, weeks later, around the Christmas holiday, she describes of touring around on the Uber and Lyft driver portals, trying to find a way to be onboarded onto the app with another account. Well, here's where that lady's ID is used. She uses the lady's name for both first and last name, and then she provides her own insurance and uh, vehicle registration information. She has in her possession a Brazilian driver's license. So she has an international license. And from an insurance perspective, there are carriers out there that do insure people with an international driver's license. So she provides that information, but all she needs now is a social security number. Well, the way she solves that problem is that she just creates one. She just creates one, and it actually works. And so now she has a second account. This is where she gets the idea. Well, hey, if I can do that for myself, I could do that for somebody and make my own money. And so she eventually got her own US driver's license so that she didn't have to rent another account. Uh, she obtains a US driver's license through the state of California because California has very relaxed rules. There are other states that have very relaxed rules for internationals to obtain a US driver's license. So the question is, how then does she come up with these IDs to create these false accounts? Well, according to the article, these IDs were pirated by employees of car lots, from the internet, and people who actually worked gig apps, who then would be very artful in screenshotting people's ID when it was required while working on Instacart, when you're delivering medication or alcohol. So there were multiple ways that these people, many of whom were um, immigrants, many of whom were immigrants, providing this information. Of course, they were providing this illegally obtained information for the purpose of their own financial gain as well. What the article does say, at least it does bring up this point. Many of the immigrants who obtained these false, many of these immigrants who rented these accounts, they rented them because they were unable to provide the proper documentation for working a job in the United States. And so they resorted to the gig apps because it was a much easier way, and and there were less obstacles that stood in the way of them being able to earn money. Now, there is an article that I noticed on Business Insider early this year where they mentioned that, where it was mentioned how gig work was like the Ellis Island for immigrants. But what the article didn't share was how these people were gaining access to these accounts. The article only talked about how they were working long hours and making short money. So that's that's the insight. These people who are working these apps, they are paying someone to access a false account. The problem is that they're always having to stay one step ahead of the gig app company, namely Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, Instacart, Grubhub, staying one step ahead of them being deactivated for their inability to provide proper documentation upon the app's investigation. The epilogue to this is that Priscilla Barbosa um, did run afoul with the law. She was arrested for felony ID theft and felony wire fraud. She stands to be deported back to Brazil, despite the fact that she agreed to a plea deal to identify other people in another scheme that involved ID theft as well. The other part to the epilogue is that when these gig apps have been approached by media and have been questioned by lawmakers to this point, they all give the same story: how what may have been done in 2018 is not likely to be done now, and that they have been very vigilant and vigorous about strengthening and improving their vetting process of drivers, and that if anyone is caught, they will be deactivated. They don't talk about they don't talk about the they don't talk about the criminal part of this, but they talk about how the person will be deactivated from the app. One other thing, Uber, in its own investigation of accounts, they noticed there was a pattern of IDs being generated, and they tipped the FBI on this. And Priscilla Barbosa was one of the people who was approached by the FBI. So that's all I have to share with this particular segment of the Gig Geezer. Again, this provides just a small slither of insight um, as to why things are the way they are when it comes to immigrants and gig apps, immigrants in the gig economy, the issue with people who are trying to run game at the airports, we see the influx of people that we see out there on the streets. Another thing, in New York City, and this has been in the news about unregistered vehicles that have been used by immigrants to perform their duties on these gig apps have been confiscated, which has in effect put some of these people out of business. But can you imagine going down the streets, and you see rows of bikes and mopeds and things that kind of remind you of the way it was back in their native country. So that's it's an ongoing issue. It it's an ongoing issue. It's a controversial issue. There's really no winners out of all this, but in the name of people looking to find ways of earning money in the United States, they're willing to do whatever they feel it takes to earn that money. And them if it means them renting false accounts, they're willing to do that. Some people are renting at 250 a week, according to some articles. One article mentioned how a guy is paying 150 every 10 days, which translates in about 500 a month. So again, that's all I have to share for this segment of the Gig Easier. If you like the content that's been provided in this segment or in any other segment, hit that subscribe button, give my content a thumbs up, share my content among others, and I definitely welcome comments in the section below. I'm Inwood Lane. As always, may your grind and may your hustle continue.